All right, let's jump right into this deep dive on Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. Just looking at these excerpts, his voice really jumps out at you.
Oh, absolutely.
Like he's right here in the room with us,
Yeah.
kind of challenging us to really think about things.
It's that directness, right? It really struck a chord with people. He doesn't shy away from tough topics.
Yeah.
And I think that's refreshing, especially these days.
Absolutely. And you picked up on something interesting in your notes, how he always circles back to taking responsibility, like cleaning up your own act before trying to fix the world.
It's like he's saying, look, yeah, the world might be a mess,
Yeah.
but you can't control all that. What you can control is how you respond to it, how you choose to live your life. And he's wary, he's wary of people who latch onto ideologies. Oh, yeah.
As a quick fix.
Right.
And he almost compares it to, those like overly simplified religious narratives that kind of miss the point.
Right. Yeah, and speaking of tough topics, he doesn't sugarcoat suffering either.
No.
He really doesn't. In fact, there's this one line that made me pause that he says, "That's sad, but alas, it's not particularly special."
I remember that one, yeah.
It seems bleak on the surface,
Mm.
but I think he's getting at something much deeper there.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's not about being pessimistic.
Right.
It's more like he's facing the reality that life, isn't always sunshine and rainbows.
Right.
And by pretending it is, we actually become more fragile in the long run. It's like those students he talks about who found his honesty reassuring.
Yeah, it's about acknowledging those difficult emotions.
Right.
Not just trying to brush them under the rug.
So it's more about bracing for impact rather than pretending
Exactly.
that there's not going to be an impact. Right.
Yeah.
But he doesn't stop there.
No, he doesn't.
He also takes on this whole idea of moral relativism, right?
Yeah.
This idea that there's no right or wrong.
He's very critical of it.
Yeah.
This overemphasis on tolerance.
Right.
To the point where we almost dismiss the value of tradition and established wisdom. He really pushes back against that. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
These shared belief systems, he says,
Yeah.
even if they're not perfect, they're necessary, right? For a functioning society.
It's a framework.
Yeah, without them, he uses that analogy of the ship of state constantly rocked, in danger of capsizing because there's no shared sense of direction.
It's like we've lost sight of those, those time-tested values.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It is.
He even mentions how the word virtue sounds almost, archaic almost.
Right. Like it's a bad word.
I know, right? And this leads us to, I think, another one of his really core ideas.
Which is?
The dominance hierarchy. Remember that dream he talks about? Where he's clinging to a chandelier.
Oh, yeah.
High above everyone else in this cathedral.
Yeah, that was a vivid image.
What's the significance of that? What do you think?
Well, I mean, he uses it to illustrate the concept of the hierarchy itself.
Yeah.
And he talks about it in a way that makes you think that it's hardwired,
It does, yeah. And he points to lobsters.
Lobsters, right? Yeah.
In the lobster world,
it's
clear, right?
Yeah.
Who's at the top?
Right.
They get the best resources. And, he's not saying we should celebrate inequality.
Right.
But he's saying, look, hierarchies exist
Everywhere.
everywhere in nature. This was way before. Humans, capitalism, patriarchy, all of that. And he has that great line. I love this line. He says, there is little more natural than culture. Dominance hierarchies are older than trees.
Yeah, so he's saying it's not just a social construct. It's something more...
It's deeper than that.
Deeper, more primal,
Exactly.
hardwired.
And he's not saying that we're destined to just be ruled by these, base instincts.
Right.
But by understanding these underlying factors, it helps us understand ourselves, how we interact with the world.
So, how does that manifest?
Well, I mean, think about it. Have you ever walked into a room and you feel it, right? All the time.
The power dynamics are just, they're there.
Absolutely, yeah. You can feel the energy shift.
It gets zapped.
Depending on, who's in charge, even if no one's saying anything.
It's like our ancient brains, right?
Yeah.
Sizing up, where do I fit in all of this?
It's like we can't even escape it.
In a way, yeah.
It's fascinating. So how do you go from that, the dominance hierarchy, to self-improvement? Because he makes that leap.
He does.
Right.
It's like he's saying, yeah, just knowing where you stand isn't everything, but it's a piece of the puzzle. But then he talks about standing up straight, making eye contact, What's the connection there?
It's that mind-body connection. He tells people, quit trooping and hunching around, walk tall and gaze forthrightly ahead. It's not just about appearances.
Right.
It's about how our posture actually affects our brain chemistry.
Really?
Yeah, like serotonin levels. When we carry ourselves with confidence, even if we're faking it at first, it can actually trigger those feel-good chemicals.
Interesting. So you act confident, and then you become more confident.
Exactly. It's like a positive feedback loop.
I like that.
And this all ties into this idea of order and chaos, which he talks about a lot.
Right.
He describes order as the familiar. Those structures we create society, our understanding of biology.
Okay.
Chaos, on the other hand, that represents the unknown, the potential for danger, but also for growth.
Oh, interesting.
He compares it to, like, the difference between a warm, secure living room
I love that.
versus, like, thin ice.
Yeah. You're safe in the living room, but it's not very exciting.
Exactly.
But the thin ice, whoa.
It's risky, but it's exhilarating,
Yeah.
full of possibilities.
So true. And Peterson's arguing we need both.
We need both. Too much order, and we become stagnant, complacent.
Yeah.
Too much chaos, and we're overwhelmed, lost at sea.
It's about finding that balance.
Finding that sweet spot, yep.
Which is easier said than done.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh.
Especially when you've got that inner critic telling you you're not good enough.
Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah. That self-sabotage monster.
We've all got that voice in our heads.
Yeah. So how do we handle that? What does Peterson say?
He uses this great analogy of the house inspector.
Okay.
Think about it. You hire an inspector to come in, find the flaws in your house, right? So you can fix them.
Right.
You don't just ignore the problems, but you don't burn the house down in despair either, do you?
That's a really good point.
It's about acknowledging those flaws without letting them define you.
So we need to become our own compassionate house inspectors.
Exactly. Treat ourselves like someone we're responsible for helping.
Instead of berating.
Yeah, exactly. And he challenges us to ask that question. Are you a tyrant with yourself as slave?
Ooh, that's a good one.
It's about self-negotiation, understanding our values and working with our limitations rather than fighting against them constantly.
Which reminds me of something else he talks about, finding meaning.
Yeah.
He seems skeptical of both extremes, pure scientific rationalism,
Yeah.
blind religious faith.
He sees value in both,
Okay.
but cautions against clinging to either extreme. Remember when he talks about Tolstoy?
Yeah, Tolstoy's struggle with meaning.
Yeah, and those 4 ways people try to cope with a meaningless existence.
Right. Retreating into ignorance, chasing pleasure, accepting a meaningless life, or just finding solace in a belief system even if it makes no logical sense.
And it's like he's saying we need more than just cold, hard facts.
Yeah.
But blind faith without any critical thinking
Right.
can be just as dangerous.
Totally. So he uses a lot of biblical stories to get his points across, right?
He does.
Like Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, and of course, the story of Christ.
Yeah, why do you think those resonate so much with him?
Well, they're like these timeless stories, right?
Archetypes.
Yeah, they tap into something deeper, like the fall from grace, sibling rivalry, the idea of sacrifice. They all speak to some kind of universal truth about being human.
I think that's a great point. Take the Adam and Eve story, for example.
Right.
It's about the thirst for knowledge, the consequences of disobedience, right?
Right.
That tension between curiosity and the unknown.
And Christ's sacrifice. That seems to be at the core of his whole philosophy, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. This idea that confronting evil, even just witnessing it, can actually clarify what is good. Like, by understanding darkness, we appreciate the light even more.
And I think that really ties back to Peterson's own story, right?
You think so?
Yeah, like his research on totalitarian regimes, the psychology of evil. It's like he stared into the abyss.
Wow.
And came back with this deeper understanding of what humans are capable of, good and bad.
It's that willingness to confront those difficult truths that I think makes his work so powerful.
It's definitely not always, what you want to hear, but
no, not at all.
You kind of need to hear it.
Sometimes you do, yeah.
Which leads us to his warnings about modern society, right?
Mm-hmm.
He seems very concerned about ideological thinking. He uses the phrase, the allure of resentment. Like that story about the student who wanted to talk about white privilege. And Peterson kind of pushed back on the entire idea.
Yeah, it's like he's saying, wait a minute, let's actually define our terms here.
Right, exactly.
Before we just accept these ideas.
He is especially critical of postmodernism, neo-Marxism.
Yeah.
Particularly their influence in academia.
Big time.
Yeah, it's pervasive. It's like he sees that thread running through so much of how we talk about things these days.
This focus on power dynamics.
Right.
Above all else. Like, he uses Jacques Derrida as an example.
Okay.
This French philosopher who said, there is nothing outside the text.
So there's no objective truth?
Basically, just different interpretations, all battling for power.
Oh, wow. That's a lot.
It is, right. And Peterson would say that leads to, a dangerous relativism.
Oh, yeah.
Where everything's subjective.
Right.
And we lose sight of those universal values.
That hold it all together.
Yeah. And I think he sees it fueling this culture of victimhood.
Right.
Resentment.
Yeah.
Which he finds really destructive.
Yeah. And it seems like he's especially concerned about young men.
He is.
In this whole context.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about the fact that, boys are falling behind in school,
mm-hmm.
higher rates of suicide, homelessness among men. What's his take on all that?
Well, he's suggesting that maybe, and I find this really interesting, that the push for gender equality.
Right. Which is a good thing.
Oh, absolutely, of course.
Right.
It's had some unintended consequences.
Okay.
Especially for boys.
How so?
Well, for one, he argues that traditional education often doesn't really resonate with how boys learn.
Right.
And then you have all these young men who are struggling to find their place, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a world where traditional masculinity.
Yeah, it's being challenged.
It's being challenged left to right. And it's interesting. He points out that, like, the most pronounced gender differences are actually in Scandinavian countries.
Wow. I would have thought it would be the opposite.
Right. Where there's a huge emphasis on equality.
Huh. So it's not about saying, like, one gender is better.
No, not at all.
It's more that...
They're different.
Right. And they need...
different approaches.
Yeah, different approaches. Yeah.
And I think, again, it goes back to nuance, acknowledging the complexity.
Instead of these
simple solutions.
Right.
Ideological slogans, like, it's not that easy.
And that seems to be what he's pushing back against.
It's what he does.
That lack of nuance.
Yeah, that need for open and honest dialogue.
Even when it's hard.
Especially when it's hard, right?
Yeah.
Because that's how we,
That's the only way we're going to, like, bridge the gap,
Exactly.
Find common ground.
And it's about listening to understand.
Not just to respond.
Not just waiting for your turn to speak.
Right. This has been, listening to you unpack all of this.
Yeah.
It's making me think about that final thought that you mentioned.
Yeah.
About, like, writing your own 12 rules.
Yeah. What would yours be?
I don't even know where to start. It's hard.
It's about taking stock, right?
Yeah.
Your values, what you've learned.
What's important to me?
What do you want to, like, guide your decisions? It's not about having all the answers.
Right.
It's about the journey,
It's about figuring it out. Yeah.
Yeah. And for you, it might change over time.
Right.
That's the beauty of it. There's no right answer.
That's true. Well, this has given me a lot to think about, that's for sure. We covered so much.
We did.
Personal responsibility, facing suffering, the dominance hierarchy.
We really went there.
Right. Meaning ideology. Peterson asks the big questions.
He really does.
And whether you agree with him or not, like, you got to admire that.
Absolutely. He makes you think.
He does. And that's what we hope this deep dive has done for you, right?
Yeah.
This is just the tip of the iceberg. So keep exploring. Keep those brain cells firing. What kind of life do you want to live?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is. And we'll see you on our next deep dive.